Skinwalkers, creatures born from dark magic, legends whispered around campfires, and tales passed down through generations. In the deep, isolated stretches of America's wilderness, there are things lurking that defy logic, beasts that prey on the weak. But what happens when one of these entities sets its sights on a human being? Tonight, I'm going to share with you a chilling true story about a horrifying encounter with a skinwalker. Story number 1. This story takes place in a remote area of New Mexico. A man, let's call him David, had always been an outdoorsman. He grew up hunting and exploring the wilderness. One weekend, he decided to take a solo trip into the deep woods, far from civilization, where cell signals fade and the silence grows heavy. Everything seemed peaceful at first. The weather was crisp, the air was fresh, and the forest was teeming with the sounds of nature. But as night fell, the atmosphere began to change. As David was enjoying his solitude by the fire, he began to hear noises in the distance, rustling leaves, snapping twigs, but nothing too alarming. It wasn't until the noises grew closer, more deliberate, that he began to feel uneasy. He shone his flashlight into the trees, scanning the shadows, but there was nothing, just silence. A silence so complete that even the usual sounds of the forest, crickets, owls, had disappeared. As he stood there, gripping his flashlight, David caught sight of something moving in the tree line. It was tall, lanky, and seemed to be on all fours. But the way it moved was unnatural, jerky, as if it was mimicking the way an animal would move. His heart raced as he realized the creature was slowly creeping towards him. But then something even more disturbing happened. The figure stood up on two legs, towering above the bushes, and spoke in a voice that sent chills down David's spine. The voice was human, but wrong, like someone imitating a person, but not quite getting it right. David's instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs were frozen in place. The creature's eyes glowed faintly in the dark, staring directly at him, as if it was sizing him up. Somehow, David snapped out of it and bolted towards his car, leaving his campsite behind. He could hear heavy footsteps trailing him, faster and faster, like something was chasing him down. When he reached his car, he didn't waste a second. He jumped in, locked the doors, and peeled out of there as fast as he could. In his rearview mirror, he caught one last glimpse of the creature standing at the edge of the tree line, watching him leave. But it wasn't until he heard the same distorted voice whispering through the vents of his car that he realized it wasn't just an animal, it was something much worse. Something that wanted to be human, but wasn't. David never went back to that part of the woods again. He tried to convince himself it was all in his head, that the isolation and darkness played tricks on his mind. But deep down, he knew what he had encountered was real. The legends of skinwalkers aren't just myths. They're warnings that there are beings out there that can take on human form, that can mimic our voices, and that can hunt us down when we're most vulnerable. So, the next time you're out in the wilderness, far from help, remember, not everything out there is what it seems. And if you ever hear a voice calling for help in the dead of night, do yourself a favor, don't answer. Story number 2. A group of friends, Tom, Lisa, Mark, and Sarah, decided to spend a weekend camping in a remote part of Arizona. They had heard about the beauty of the area, but also the legends that surrounded it. Despite the warnings from locals about venturing too deep into the desert, they brushed it off as just stories. The first night was peaceful. The stars blanketed the sky, and the only sounds were the crackling fire and distant coyote howls. But, as the night wore on, things took a sinister turn. Around midnight, the group began hearing strange, drawn-out howls echoing through the desert. At first, they thought it was just coyotes, but the sound was different, deeper, almost like a person trying to howl like an animal. It sent a chill down their spines. They tried to ignore it, convincing themselves it was just wildlife. But the howls grew louder and seemed to be getting closer. Then, out of nowhere, they heard rustling nearby, just beyond the firelight. Mark grabbed a flashlight and pointed it into the darkness. That's when they saw a creature standing on the edge of the light, watching them. It was hard to make out, but they could see enough to know it wasn't any ordinary animal. Its limbs were long and thin, its eyes reflecting the light in an unnatural way. But the most disturbing part was its face. It looked almost human, but something was terribly wrong, as if the features had been twisted and stretched. As they stared in shock, the creature dropped to all fours and started moving quickly and erratically, circling them just outside the ring of light. Then they heard a voice coming from the darkness, calling out, "Help me." It wasn't just any voice, it was Sarah's voice, only it wasn't coming from her. The real Sarah was right there, frozen in fear. The voice was coming from the creature, mimicking her exactly, but with a disturbing, hollow tone. That's when the group broke. They grabbed their gear and ran, sprinting towards their car. The creature let out a bone-chilling scream and gave chase, moving with unnatural speed. They could feel it closing in, its footsteps growing louder. Just as they reached the car and locked the doors, the creature slammed into the side, letting out a horrible screech. It clawed at the windows, its twisted face pressed against the glass, staring at them with those unnerving eyes. They floored the gas and didn't stop until they were miles away. When they finally looked back, the creature was gone, but the fear didn't leave them. For weeks after, they all reported nightmares, visions of that thing, lurking just outside their homes, watching and waiting. They never returned to that area, and to this day, they can't fully explain what they saw. But they believe they had a close encounter with a Skinwalker, a malevolent being that thrives on fear, drawing people in with false cries for help, only to strike when they least expect it. So remember, if you ever hear a familiar voice calling for help in the wilderness, be wary. Sometimes, the things we think are human are far from it. And out there in the dark, the Skinwalkers wait. Story number 3. Jake was an experienced hunter who had spent countless weekends in the forests of Utah. He knew the terrain like the back of his hand and took pride in his survival skills. But during one particular hunting trip, something followed him, a presence that he couldn't see, but could feel. The first day went as usual. He scouted the area, set traps, and tracked deer. As night fell, he settled into his tent, ready to get some sleep before heading out early the next morning. But, as the darkness deepened, strange things began to happen. Just after midnight, Jake was jolted awake by the sound of footsteps crunching through the leaves outside his tent. He stayed completely still, listening carefully. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, and seemed to circle his campsite. He thought it might be a curious animal, but something about the pattern of the footsteps felt wrong. They were too measured, too precise, like a person trying to mimic the sound of an animal walking. As he scanned the trees with his flashlight, he saw nothing but shadows. For a while, the sound stopped, but as Jake was about to go back into his tent, he heard it again, this time closer. The footsteps were accompanied by low, guttural breathing, something that sent shivers down his spine. Whatever it wasn't normal. He decided to keep the fire going and stay up for a while, just in case. That's when he heard something that made his blood run cold. Someone, or something, calling his name. It was faint, barely audible, but unmistakably human. The voice came from the direction of the woods, but it was distorted, as if it was being forced out of a throat not meant to speak. What terrified him the most was that it was his mother's voice, perfectly replicated. Even though she was miles away at home, he knew no one else was out there with him. Every instinct in his body screamed at him not to follow the voice, but curiosity tugged at him, mixed with an overwhelming sense of dread. Jake stepped closer to the tree line, his flashlight sweeping through the dark underbrush. That's when he saw a shape crouched low, just out of reach of the light. It was humanoid, but twisted and wrong, with limbs that bent in unnatural ways. The creature was looking directly at him, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. It grinned at him, revealing sharp teeth, and then, in that same distorted voice, it spoke again. "Jake, come here." He didn't hesitate. He turned and ran back to his camp, heart pounding in his chest. The creature didn't chase him, but he could hear it laughing, a sick, mocking laugh that followed him all the way back to his tent. Jake didn't sleep for the rest of the night. He stayed by the fire, rifle in hand, waiting for the first light of dawn. As soon as it was bright enough, he packed up and left, not even bothering to eat or take down his tent properly. He just wanted to get out of there. On his way back to his truck, he found something that confirmed his worst fears: large footprints in the dirt. Human-like, but wrong, as if they belonged to something wearing the skin of a person. The prints followed him all the way back to the main road, where they suddenly stopped, as if whatever it was had vanished into thin air. Jake never went hunting in that area again. He still doesn't know what exactly he encountered, but he's certain it was a Skinwalker creature that can mimic voices and appearances, feeding off the fear it instills in its victims. The legends warn us, if you hear a voice in the woods that shouldn't be there, don't follow it, because it might not be human. Thanks for watching. If this story gave you chills, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more terrifying tales. Stay safe and trust your instincts, especially in the wilderness.